I'm going to tell my testimony in a series of parts, approximately 15-minute videos. It might take me a long time to get through it, but I trust that each part of my testimony will resonate with you and help you to recognize that you are not alone. This page is for people who are dealing with anxiety, depression, intrusive thoughts, and lack of purpose. And I hope and pray that as I tell my story, you'll find things that you resonate with, and the things that I experienced and the things that I went through will help lead you out of that darkness. 10 years ago, I was in university. I was about 22 years old and dating the man who is now my husband. I was living in a house in a city that had one of the highest crime rates in my country. I'm going to refer to my boyfriend then as my husband now, because that's what he is. My husband and I decided to rent this house because it was a really reasonable price. And at the time we were living in an apartment, and we thought it would be great to be in a home. It had 2 bedrooms, a garden, a deck, a front yard, and it just felt like a big step up for us. When our parents came to help us move in, like I said, we were like 21 years old. They didn't want to leave us in this house. We didn't really realize it when we first looked at the listing, but there was bars on the windows, and there was a bar like this on the door that you would put a piece of 2x4 in. Obviously, this house was in a dangerous neighborhood. At the time, I had been dabbling in some dark music. I was really far from God. I didn't know God yet. And I was feeling myself slip into a darker and darker place. I was using drugs. I was using cocaine. I had, not regularly, but when we would go out and party, it wasn't daily use. It was what people would call recreational. But I was using cocaine without really any restraint, even though it wasn't daily use. I was smoking a lot of pot. I was having sex before marriage. I had done other drugs too. I had done mushrooms. I had done ecstasy. We were partiers. We were in a band. And yet I was in university. I was a good student, but I was definitely dabbling in things that I shouldn't dabble in. At the same time, I started to notice my mind slip into a lot of fear and paranoia, which I would attest to the drugs, probably. If you've done drugs, you know that they really mess with your mind. And I would say that they're an open door and a gateway to the demonic to enter your life. So at the time, I was kind of starting to sense this darkness all around me. It was like there was a demonic energy around me. And the house that we moved into had a very spooky feel. And to boot, it was in a very dangerous neighborhood. And in that neighborhood, there was actually murders happening blocks away from me. So at the time, my husband, forgive me for using similar phrasings and turn of phrase and saying or whatever. I'm nervous and this is my first time doing this. At the time, my husband lost his job, and we had been spending a lot of time in another nearby, about 4 hours away, town where his family lived. And I said to him, let's just see what happens. We were so young, we often flew by the seat of our pants, we say. I said to him, why don't you apply for a job there? And if you get it, we'll move. So I was in university, I was finishing classes, and he got a job in this other town. So I was going to finish my semester, and then we were going to move after classes were over, and I was going to reapply to the university there. So he left and he started working in this town, and I ended up being alone in this house now. So I had paranoia kind of starting, fear kind of starting, and then I had a reason to be afraid. There was murders happening. I was alone. I had no family around. I had one friend. a lifelong childhood friend. So I'm really grateful for that. She's still my friend and we still live in the same town. And this is a different town. We've just been connected all that time. So I was afraid, I was alone, I was in a dangerous situation, and I had opened my mind up to demonic influence. So here I was in this house, and I started to hear things and see things. I just always felt like a threat was around. I remember it just started to get worse. I started to feel like I could hear my name. I had this fear of trains because in high school, a girl I went to high school with, she saw someone take their life in front of a train. And I remember hearing that story and it really stuck with me because it was so traumatic and devastating. And so during this time, I would like hear trains. I know that sounds really weird. I was afraid at night often, and it just peaked so high, this constant state of stress and fear and paranoia, that one day in university, this is my last day I ever stepped foot in a university. I was in a class that I fought really hard to get into. I really wanted to be in it, and I couldn't focus. I was hearing voices in my head. I felt like I was living in a dream state. If you have ever experienced this, it's kind of like this constant state of fear, anxiety, and paranoia where everything around you feels like it's not even really real. And I couldn't focus on anything the professor was saying. I started to cry from this constant state of panic in my heart, and I ran out of the class and I never went back. I ran to the counseling office at the university. I told them I didn't know what was happening to me, but I couldn't find a word for it. I was like dealing with this extreme paranoia and anxiety. I remember she said to me, well, you don't have the 4 main pillars for life. Your relationship, one of the pillars was like intimacy. Your relationship isn't there. You don't feel safe in your own home. You don't have family around, and food was the other one. And I had food. So I had like 3 of the 4 pillars missing. And she said, this makes sense that you're dealing with this mental breakdown, is what I often refer back to it as. So I cried. I left the university that day. I went home. I remember calling my grandma and my mom and just saying like, I can't do this. I didn't realize, I know I'm saying this a lot, but I didn't know what was going on. I was just like, I felt so lost and so extremely anxious. Now, rewind back to another part of my life all happening at the same time. I was also working a lot. I was doing university full time, and I was working 2 part-time jobs. So I was really, really like, I was at my like total breaking point. At my one job, I remember sitting at my office desk. I was doing like clerical work for a boating company. And I just started having the first time that these voices in my head and these intrusive thoughts started happening. I was sitting at my desk and I just kept hearing, you're going crazy, you're going crazy, you're going crazy, you're going crazy. And I fixated on that thought. It was like one of my greatest fears felt like it was coming true, because I loved life. I loved people. I loved living. Like I just loved life. And one of my greatest fears was to lose my mind, because when you lose your mind, you lose reality, and in reality is life, and it just spirals from there. So I'm having this thought, and I start Googling, how do you know if you're going crazy? How do you know if you have schizophrenia? How do you know if you have bipolar? And I just was thinking like, I have a mental health disorder. What is it? I thought that I was losing my mind. If you've ever felt like that, I want you to know, or if you've ever felt like that, you know what that's like. This fixating and ruminating on this one thought that doesn't have an answer. You start to doubt yourself and your own ability to recognize your own reality. And that doubt starts turning into a lack of trust. And that lack of trust in yourself starts turning into a lack of trust of your reality. And this paranoia becomes really extreme because you start to not understand what's true about reality, what's true about yourself, what's true about what you're capable of. And that's when the devil can start planting, actually, he can start planting lies at any time, of course. This was deep rooted in my childhood, which we'll get to. But that's when I started to fall apart. I started to question my reality. I didn't know if I was losing my mind. And of course, one thing they always say is people who are losing their mind don't know they're losing their mind. So I wasn't really in this reality of schizophrenia or psychosis but the devil had me believing that I was, and I couldn't prove that I wasn't. So again, this shaky foundation of trust in myself and in reality. And I also thought that I was going crazy. So I didn't really want to tell anyone. I didn't really want to ask anyone to give me the reassurance that I needed, because I thought if I tell them the types of things that are going through my mind, they will think I'm crazy. And I had seen a dear friend of mine go into the psych ward when I was a kid, and I didn't want to be separated from my family. I didn't want to be put in the hospital. I didn't want to be separated from my husband. So I isolated myself even more. And that's when things started to get pretty crazy.